Since my Ikea gown is moving from the early mid-1700s for my Outlander project to the 1780s, a new silhouette is in fashion, which means a new bum pad. This pattern comes from the American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking as part of the Italian gown undergarments. The fabric I decided to use for this project is also from a garage sale and was probably $1. It's probably 100% polyester, but it's got that stripe just like the one in the book, so I went for it. You first start out by cutting a rectangle piece that acts as the underskirt piece. Luckily, this fabric was narrow enough that I could use the selvage edges as the two sides along the stripe without having to hem them. Next, you need to cut out the actual bum pad shapes. These are sort of arch-shaped pieces with flat ends. Can you hear my cat? And you need 4 of them to make the 2 bum pad pieces. I really need to invest in a different sort of pattern marking pen because I am aware that you can absolutely not see the lines that I'm drawing, and I can barely see them in person, so I think that means it's time for a new pen. An important thing to note is that these 2 bum pads next to each other need to make up the length of the back of your waist. So that's the only adjustment that needs to be made there. For the fullness amount, it'll just be like how much you stuff it. You don't need to change the pattern too much from the book. For the 2 non-salvage edges of the rectangle, I folded the fabric over twice and sewed in a hem. This probably should have been narrower, but it's hard for me to iron in a hem that's super narrow. I can really only do like a 1/2 inch or more, so I definitely need to get better at that. You also need to throw a line of gathering stitches along the top for later. Now starting on the extra butt cheek pieces, as I call them, you sew those together all the way around, leaving the flat edge open for stuffing and attaching to the waistband. I snipped the corners of these like I see people do. I don't think this was necessary here. And then you just flip them out right side out. Millie. Hey. Next, those bum pieces get pinned along the gathered waist, and you just gather it to what half of your waist is, and then add those bum pad pieces on. And I just pinned and then sewed along one half of them, leaving the other half open for stuffing. Fill up those extra bum cheeks. You can use a lot of different things. You can use horrible polyfill like me, feathers, fabric scraps or cabbage, cork, straw, really whatever you've got. I think even like horsehair is an extant bum pads, just whatever you've got. How full you decide to stuff these is how much your silhouette's gonna change. I'm a little bit chunkier of a person, so I went for less stuffed than I think the book calls for. The book calls for a certain amount of inches to add to your hip measurement, but I went for less than that. I just find it more flattering. I kind of hate my earlier bum pad because it just makes it so large. Also, I ran out of polyfill, but that's besides the point. To finish off these edges for the pockets, I pinned along a twill tape that I would sew 2 lengths down along the top and the bottom so that the raw edge will be enclosed in the middle of those 2 stitch lines. This is easy in theory, but kind of hard to pin on when you have a pocket that's full that you need to pin down, and then also you have those gathered layers below and you want to try to make it all straight. So there's probably a better method to this, but this seems like my go-to thing with the twill tape to finish off a raw edge, just sew on either side of it. If you had a thicker twill tape, you could probably just encase the whole edge, like a whole waistband that would wrap around both sides would probably be easier. Now, if you want to be like me, just sew with wild abandon along the two sides of the twill tape, paying absolutely no attention to what is happening to the bottom fabric. And when you do that, you will end up with something like this disaster that's going on here on the underside. I have elected to decide that this does not matter to me because nobody will see, but yikes. Big, big yikes. Now that we've got our new butt made, it's time to work on that petticoat. You will recognize this fabric if you watched the earlier video. This is just the back side of my duvet cover. For making a petticoat, I don't really think you need a pattern. All you need to know is that a normal petticoat is about 100 to 120 inches around to give you enough fullness to make it look nice, and then your measurement from the waist to the floor, plus a couple of inches just to be safe. Now, the challenge of using a duvet cover is that it's not normal fabric shaped, so it's not a long piece of fabric, and I can't get two 40 by 60 inch panels out of the fabric to make up my waist to floor, which is about 40, and then 120 inches around. It just won't fit. But never fear, piecing is period. So I started by cutting one longer strip that was 40 inches by about, 80 inches, I think. That was that top piece folded in half. Then with the remaining piece that wasn't 40 inches in length, it was a little bit shorter than that, I cut out 20 inches down from that last cut. Then I cut that down the center. So I have two small pieces that when stacked on top of each other in the other orientation, it'll be 40 by the extra 40 inches I need to add to get 120 all the way around. Kind of confusing. I drew this. That's probably still confusing, but you can see the two pieces put together to make up the small square, and then there's the longer rectangle, and that all together makes up the 120 inch strip. This is then cut so that I can have two even halves to make up the skirt. So the back panel is made up of 3 pieces with 2 seams, just like that. And then I decided on using French seams to make my seam finishes easier for me. And you sew up both sides to make a tube, leaving the top, 8 to 10 inches open, enough that you can stick your hands in to get to the pockets. Once the pleating is done, I want a finished edge along the top, so I'm just folding over the top edge about 1/2 inch or so before I start the pleating process. This is my way to get around not using a full waistband to encase the top, which I don't have the right twill tape, so I've got to use what I've got, which is this really narrow stuff. And don't forget to finish off those pockets unless you have selvages there because you're using normal fabric, unlike me. But I turned them over twice and just ran a top stitch down. I'm not too concerned about visible stitches on the outside. This is a petticoat, so the sides won't even be shown under the overgown, I should say. Now everyone put on your math hats, it's time for pleating. All you need is the total width of your fabric and your waist measurement. From that, you can get what I call a pleating ratio, which is the percentage that you need to shrink down your fabric to fit your final measurement. Then using that, I can figure out how many inches of fabric need to be smushed together in what size pleat. I picked 1-inch pleats, didn't want to do anything smaller because that's a lot more work. And then using 1-inch pleats, I know that I need to make 3 inches down to 1 inch. And I already knew that this was like a 1/3 ratio, which is the easiest because you can a pleat uses 3 times the fabric, right? Because you do 3 folds on top of each other. So it makes it very easy. And because of that, I didn't need to account for the box pleat because a box pleat will also use 3 times the amount of fabric. It's just 2 knife pleats facing together, right? So I made a 4-inch strip in the middle, and then I just did 1-inch knife pleats towards the back on either side, making sure that once I had done a 1/2 of 1/2, that equaled 10 inches. So I knew that all the way around was going to be 40 inches. Now, as I said earlier, to finish this off, I'm just going to stitch a twill tape along the turned raw edge and make sure that that raw edge stays right in the middle of the twill tape all the way along, leaving 2 strips of sewing stitches right along the top. That is visible from the front, but this is going to be under the bodice and the skirts, and it's white thread on almost white fabric, so I'm not too fussed about it. This is where the importance of that second layer of pins in your pleats comes in handy, because it's going to hold the fabric from shifting underneath and messing up those beautiful pleats that you worked so hard on. So it is absolutely worth it to take the extra time to do those 2 rows of pins holding your pleats flat. And then you get to do the most satisfying thing ever. Take out all your pleating pins. It's the best. And here's what the top looks like. Remember, you can always get a fatter twill tape and encase the top if you don't want visible stitches like that. Now, to put on this petticoat, you start with the back strings first. So you tie those on the front, and it's better to make your ties off to either side when you're actually getting dressed, so that the bodice doesn't have, like, you know, a chunky amount of ties to sit on top of in the front middle. And there you go. I left it unhemmed for now until I get the rest of the dress finished, but that is it for the foundational parts and the petticoat. It's a pretty quick video, not super exciting, and a pretty easy process, but stay tuned for the completion of the bodice in the next video.